You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
Hello, this is Dana Cowan, and you are listening to the Progressive Hedonist Podcast. Today, I am ecstatic to be interviewing one of my idols, Alice Waters. When I came to Food and Wine, I didn't know a lot about the food world, but I knew all about Alice Waters because I'd heard about Chez, Panisse, this restaurant in Berkeley, California, that had basically created the farm-to-table movement in America. And then as I followed Alice's career and watched what she did with Edible Schoolyard, we talked about changing the world through school lunch and organic gardens. And she's continued on and on to innovate and impact America. And she is the most recent recipient of the 10th annual Julia Child Award. Welcome, Alice. I'm so happy to have you on this podcast.
Thank you, Dana. It was a pretty extravagant introduction.
But it's so true. I knew so little, back in 1995 at Food and Wine. At that time, Julia Child was actually a contributor to Food and Wine. And it was so much fun to have her in the kitchen with us. And I know that she came to Chez Panisse very early on. What was that like?
Well, it was kind of amazing because she came with Marion Cunningham, who was a very good friend of mine. And I of course, knew all about Julia Child because she opened the door to cooking in this country in a way that I really related to because I had come back from France so recently. And I got her book immediately. And I was overwhelmed by it. But
did you spend 3 days making boeuf bourguignon?
I left that to somebody else. But I really didn't know anything about cooking before I went to France in 1965. I went to France because I wanted a junior year abroad. and
as so many do.
As so many do. And so I took that junior year abroad. And that's how it all began. But it really began in those little restaurants because I had never tasted food like that. And at every street corner, there was an outdoor market and people standing in line to get baguettes at bakeries that had aromas that brought me in. I didn't know that when I went to France, it was a real slow food nation. They only had olive oil in the south of France. That wasn't in the north of France. And it wasn't really until we had this naive idea that if we opened a restaurant, the French food would come. And that's how naive I was. But in fact, I was right, because in looking for taste, I ended up at the doorstep of an organic regenerative farmer, Bob Kennard. And he said, taste this. And I just fell in love with the salad he had. I said, it tastes like France. It's just amazing. People were hearing about my desire to buy food that was really tasty, and I would trade lunches at the restaurant. What happened was they brought things that I had never tasted before, like Meyer lemons and things that were from their backyard gardens. And all of a sudden, I woke up to the ideas of organic and regenerative farming. And because Bob Kennard was, in fact, regenerative, which I didn't know what it meant at all, but he said, my vegetables are 20% more nutritious than anybody else's. And I laughed. And they were 25% more nutritious. And so that's how it began. And he wanted all of our food compost from the restaurant. So he would bring vegetables down and he'd take all of the food compost back to his farm. And it was the most really wonderful relationship. And the word got out around California that we were paying farmers the real cost for their food. And then everybody came. Yeah. And I have this map of all the farms, about 80 farms at the beginning, including very famous people like Masimoto and his speeches. And, but I didn't know that this was really about picking food when it was ripe and local. It wasn't being shipped from any place else. It wasn't picked when it was, shippable. It was what I had really eaten as a child in my parents' victory garden.
The thing that strikes me now is that what Bob Kernod was doing was indeed regenerative, because I think that word has become so powerful. And in fact, that the Julia Child Award is in honor of that particular aspect of your work.
Also, growing up in New Jersey and knowing very specifically, you didn't have tomatoes or corn unless your mother canned tomatoes until the summer. And that was it. And when it was over, it was over. And everybody on the planet ate like this. Yeah. No pesticides even before about World War II ended. Yeah. And that's when the pesticides came in. And by the mid-50s, it was a fast food culture that we created out of food from around the world and everything fast, cheap, and easy. And we had not been deeply embedded in those ideas before that time, at least not like other cultures like Chinese, France, Italy, Spain, every place on the earth, with the exception of this culture, has kept, even if they haven't expressed it, it's deep down inside. And the actions that are being taken in France and Italy, which are most important to me, are based on that understanding of nutrition, aliveness of food, seasonality, the soil, all of that.
I'm wondering if you've seen, because of climate change and because certain areas are getting hotter, certain areas are getting wetter, certain areas are, struck by tornadoes that it's never been possible before. Has that affected the food that's available to you in Northern California?
Absolutely, it has. And I haven't really had a great tomato yet.
Wow.
We know what happens when rain comes at the wrong time and when the sun doesn't come at the right time. So we're very aware of climate change, and all of our farmers are struggling and worried about that. I always learned about seeds from around the world, from hot countries. What do we need to plant? What do we need in cold climates? I know they're working on that at the University of New Mexico and also in Arizona. What do we plant when it gets too hot? What did indigenous people plant way back when? And I am genuinely worried about it. Terribly worried about it, because we're only at the beginning of this. We're talking about having not very long time for 2030 when the UN says we're not going to be able to change what's happening.
We'll be past the point where an intervention can heal what we've destroyed. I've heard you say that in order to address climate change, we really need to address the food system and that the food system can play a leading role in climate change. I, of course, agree. But when you say that, can you just tell me more about what you mean?
Well, I can say that with a lot of conviction because 30 years ago, I started the Edible Schoolyard project in one middle school in Berkeley, California. The principal of the school called me up because he had heard I'd like gardens and maybe I could improve the look of the school.
And you're like, I've had how it looks, that's fine. But
well,
I have something else in
little
mind.
did he know. And I went down and I talked to Neil Smith, and I won't ever forget that conversation because we were looking down over the whole area of the school from a hillside. And it used to be that the school had 500 students on 22 acres of land. And all of a sudden, the acreage has been consumed by the city. I mean, there was a vacant lot that had junk in it. There were a lot of portable buildings to take care of the 1,000 kids, but there was still some trees and land around. And I, being the Montessori teacher that I am, and a belief that students learn best by doing, and that our senses are pathways into our minds. And when we're not touching, smelling, tasting, and we're only on a screen all day, we are not getting input into our minds. I have always thought about education this way. Mm-hmm. And I think at this moment in time, the power of taste combined with local schools mm-hmm. and communities could address climate with the procurement power of school lunch.
We've all heard about community-supported agriculture, right? But you've taken it one step farther, which I think is so brilliant. So it's school-supported agriculture. So can you tell us just a little bit about what is school-supported agriculture?
Well, I do think of it in the way that community-supported agriculture has created farmers markets across this country in a very short period of time. And it's about putting the farmer first. The farmer, the fisherman, the rancher comes first because we could not eat without them. And so I want the schools to use that money for procurement of food to support the people who are taking care of the land regeneratively, organically. The people who are doing that need to be selling directly to the schools. Now, this is something extremely important.
That also seems extremely hard, Alice.
Well, yes and no.
Okay.
Because we would have to decentralize, no question. But that doesn't mean that you can't have the food brought to you in a timely manner. Mm-hmm. I have talked a lot with the University of California because I knew Janet Napolitano, when she was president, had a carbon neutrality for 2025 for the University of California. And I said to her, could organic regenerative food be part of that? And she looked me right in the eye and she said, organic, yes, maybe a few years more for regenerative organic. And you know that there's not a farmer or a rancher that wouldn't like to make the real cost that it takes to grow their food. There's not anyone who doesn't want that. And
now, Alice, is that why you're cutting out the middleman? Because then the farmer can have the true cost.
That's right. Because the middleman asks for an extra 10, 15% onto the cost, and they charge us for that. I want to give that money directly to the people who are growing the food. And the ways that if we develop a system that gives meaningful work to people, I think there's going to be people that want to volunteer to help get the food from the farm to the school.
So like a volunteer corps to be the connector. I mean,
Yes.
I know that in New York City, for example, with organizations that work with hunger relief, they have a small volunteer corps to pick up small amounts of food and deliver it to pantries where it can be distributed. So it's sort of that model, except on a university scale with local farmers to bring them to the school. You gave me goosebumps.
And I've also thought about that meaningless work has become part of the corporate world of this country. And that people are, even being asked to work in factories that just have vending machines for lunch. They're not talking to anybody else. They're on their screen the whole time. And the Surgeon General of this country thinks the biggest issue is loneliness in terms of health. And he's writing a cookbook.
I didn't know
about this, about how to cook together and eat together. So I know deeply that has been the pleasure of my life, is having meaningful work. I don't want anybody to work in the basement washing dishes. I don't want people who are just the helpers in the kitchen not to eat the food that we're serving everybody else. I don't want a kitchen to be white. I want it to be pale colors so it can be clean, but how about a warm yellow? How about real lights instead of fluorescent lights? I want to have everybody have a voice in what something tastes like.
It reminds me, of course, of regenerative agriculture. It's a way of thinking which makes it very hard for people to grasp onto because unlike organics, it's not codified. But the idea is to never be extractive, to always be sort of giving back. And what you've just described, Alice, in how you want people to work together is an entirely regenerative system where everyone feels fulfilled and part of it, and no one feels that they've been just something leached out of them.
Exactly. Every little worm, every little bug in the soil is giving health to the carrot. And I do feel that way about it, that we have gone that way of the chef is way on the top and way down on the bottom are all these people, shelling peas. And it's something that really probably comes from, again, that time in France. This was before really, the very fancy French restaurants were developing in that pyramid form. It was when everybody knew about the food. You could ask anybody on the street, oh, that's an early girl tomato, or whatever it was. They knew the names. They were brought up in school.
What I think of fast food, I think McDonald's, but you actually broaden it to other types of like eating quickly and also to kind of a fast culture that lacks appreciation. Do you want to talk about that for a second? Because I think it's so compelling and at the root of possible change.
That's why I'm so hopeful about changing the food in schools, because basically what we did in the 50s was change cooking at home and eating dinner with our families to a McDonald's format of fast, cheap, and easy. And we have adopted also the values that come along with it. We don't just want it fast, cheap, and easy. We want everything in the world to be fast, cheap, and easy. The furniture we buy, the clothes we buy, everything. And it's destroyed a culture of community in this country. I'm just proud that in France, the mayor of Paris decided that she was going to only buy organic regenerative food within 125 miles of Paris. And she started a year ago And they're 2/3 of the way there in all the schools in Paris.
I was in Paris and I went to a museum that focuses on the city of Paris and their efforts in regenerative and sustainability. And the idea that that even existed, I thought was amazing. They had a little garden, it talked about the schools, but it made me think there's such political will. How do we get from where we are in America to have the political will to do what you're saying?
Well, I think we're almost between the rock and the hard place because we have climate just pushing. And if we don't make a dramatic change, and as I'm always saying, this is the only delicious solution to climate. It's the only one that is not difficult to do. It is rewarding in every way. You're meeting your neighbors, you're connecting in the kids in school with each other at the table. I'm talking about human values that have been around since the beginning of time.
Something you're saying strikes such a chord with me because with progressive hedonists, which is my current venture, I'm looking at the intersection of climate and joy because I believe that if people can find pleasure in food and in change, they will make that change, right? But if they think that it's all about doom and we're all going to die, no one wants to join that movement. But the thing that I struggle with, and I'm curious your opinion, is I don't think it's hard to make good choices rewarding the regenerative farmer because I know everything that goes into that ingredient, that egg, for example. But there are people who are very resistant, and every ounce of my time is being spent trying to find those people who are resistant and bring them along.
And well, you better bring your peach along. And so, every time I talk with anybody, if I'm outside the restaurant, I bring food and I put it down on the table, no matter where I am. If I can bring them to the restaurant, I bring them there. I want them to be awakened in their senses because, again, those are the pathways into our minds. I don't know whether you know that we're going to have a big event in Washington, D.C.
Tell us about the big event.
It's called Climate Food Hope. Well, I first wanted to have it on the mall for 1,000 farmers and teachers because, as Truman said, they're our most valuable citizens. And I sort of imagined that, but I also thought with climate upon us, I was so upset that I wanted to do something before the election in November. And so we needed to apply for a permit on the mall a year ago.
Oh, wow.
And then someone said, you should talk to the Smithsonian. They have a rooftop that looks out to the Lincoln Memorial, and you can seat about 200 people. They were so enthusiastic that we decided to do that. We're not doing it on the rooftop, but we're doing it in the room. And it has a little outdoor space. Fritz Haig is going to build a little edible schoolyard garden. But we want to bring people from all over the country and around the world. People like Michael Pollan, Eric Schlosser, Raj Patel, my heroes. And I want the hope to shine forth.
Whether you're a chef or just love going to restaurants, you know the best ingredients are everything, especially when it comes to beef. In Northern Australia, there's a different approach to raising high-quality beef. Westholme, based in Queensland and Northern Territory, is working with the land to create nature-led Australian Wagyu. Westholme stewards 16 million acres of rangeland guided by their natural ecosystem. They're led by a belief that if they balance the needs of their cattle with the needs of the environment, both can thrive. Westholme's team of rangeland experts and nature managers use a variety of tools to monitor and respond to the welfare of the environment, like satellites that assess grass health and on-the-ground research. Cattle are happier when they have the freedom to forage and explore. so West Home ensures that they can roam wild, foraging at will for the first 2 to 3 years of their lives. Their cows graze on native grasses like Mitchell grass, which is only found in Australia, along with dozens of other plants, herbs, and seasonal legumes. The result is a high-quality Wagyu beef that reflects the terroir of Northern Australia and a flavor suited to complement any cuisine. West Home believes that when nature leads, flavor follows. Learn more at westhome.com.
I'm curious, what do you do to regenerate yourself?
I love to talk with people about food, and talking with you this way lifts my spirits. To see people doing projects that I never even imagined, that are thinking about the world in a different way, but that's so harmonious with something we're doing and thinking about, because, food is universal. And so is education. And I learned so much from my Chinese friends. I was close with Chez Chang, who always had dinners with Julia Child and with James Beard. And I was the young kid on the block.
What do you remember from them? She was so elegant. And I mean, just picturing the four of you in a room, it makes the ground shake. So what was it like? If you can describe it, if you remember.
I just remember Cecilia was on one side and Julia on the other side, and James Beard was across the way. And there wasn't anything that one of the four of them didn't know about or want to talk about. James talked for half an hour about all the ways of caviar, and who did it. I just unbelievable. But Cecilia and Julia were such good friends, and they wanted to impart all of this to me. We always had at Cecilia's, we had Peking duck. And I don't think I've ever had it like that ever again. But she was cooking for those people, and they were loving it. But the tradition, how it was passed down to her, and what she knew about every seasonal vegetable and fruit was astonishing.
Do you get as much of a charge from going to places that live the human values that are important to you? Like, you were at an Auberge resort recently, and I was like, that looked amazing. Are there any places like that you feel help bring people on this journey to embrace regenerative and embrace these ideas?
Well, when I go to a place, Sicily is one that I can think of, but many, many places where they don't just have 2 kinds of figs. They have 22. And I'm just astonished by the biodiversity and the fact that something like nettles can be awfully delicious when they're cooked with garlic and olive oil. And we started making nettle pizzas at the restaurant. But nettles are everywhere as just weeds on this planet. And to understand that biodiversity, I think that is what inspires me most about food, is the beauty of that.
I have one last question for you, which is, if you were going to make the meal that would bring someone the greatest pleasure and make them understand that the greatest pleasure is food that's regenerative for themselves and for the planet, what would that meal be?
Oh, a whole meal. Oh, good.
Oh, you could.
Well, I have to say that I feel like I made a big change in the way we think about salad. Before me, it was iceberg lettuce, really. And I lived with friends in the south of France, my friends who grew that mesclun salad. And she made the most wonderful garlicky vinaigrette. And I just fell in love with it. And I fell in love with it so much that I dug up my whole backyard of my house and planted mesclun salad for the early days of Chez Panisse because I wanted that salad to be served with a little baked goat cheese that, again, someone from France, Nourish, and she did that, and still on the menu, still everybody wants it to come, still wonderful. And that little mesclun salad goes all year long. We put different things in it. Ross Kennard says, here's your salad, use it. And we do.
I can see so much in that thought, because not only could you convince people by the salad having so much taste, it's nutritious, and then you get that creamy goat cheese and it feels a little bit indulgent. And then if you wanted to, you could go and plant some mesclun. If you lived in a small space, you could plant it on your windowsill. If you lived in a big space, you could take over a box. And so you could actually make your own salad that would remind you of the power of growing, how important it is to value those who farm, because once you try to grow your own, you know how hard it is.
It is, but it's so rewarding. And when I see the Edible Schoolyard, I mean, these young kids, to think I planted that little seed and now I'm eating it at the kitchen class. And I mean, how did kids all of a sudden start to like hummus and greens and peanut bread? Where did that come from? It's the power of taste. It goes through every culture. It's just what can really bring us together.
With that, Alice, I say thank you so much for spending time with me today. I love talking to you. I could do it all day long. I will say that you've planted so many seeds and millions of people have had the benefit. And I'm just so delighted to have even more people hear a little bit from you on this Progressive Hedonist podcast. So thank you all for listening. Thank you, Alice, for joining me.
Well, I have to say, as climate food hope.
Climate food hope. I'm with you.